After years of unpaid bills that choked electricity generation, Nigeria approved $128 million for debt settlement to gas producers. Is this the reset the power sector needs? Good morning and welcome to another power-packed episode of Business Week. This week, Netflix is swallowing Warner Brothers' Discovery for $83 billion in a deal that will reshape Hollywood, while Nigeria targets right here at home $10 billion through a new oil and gas licensing round, hedging its energy transition bets. And Africa's state-owned assets under management just quietly crossed the $1 trillion mark. Meanwhile, Kenya is handing Vodacom 15% of Safaricom for $1.6 billion. And silver, the precious metal, aptly nicknamed the devil's metal for its wild price swings, has surged 90% this year. Meanwhile, the UK has pulled $1 billion from Total's Mozambique LNG project, raising questions about the future of that project. And here at home, Nigeria has approved $128 million to finally clear gas debts that have choked the power sector. Better late than never, I guess. Later on, we take a look at how technology is revolutionizing tax compliance in Nigeria now. If you missed the big business stories of the week, I've got you covered, don't worry. I'm Rolake Akikugbe-Fulani. Let's dive in. We start with a look at global energy commodities as always. Let's take a look at what energy commodities are saying. Well, starting with a look at natural gas. Natural gas actually stole the spotlight this week. Double-digit jump. While crude prices did hold steady and gasoline did slip, natural gas surged more than 14% on the week, boosted by colder temperatures, stronger heating demand in the Northern Hemisphere. Brent and WTI hedged higher, up 0.82% and 1.76% respectively, supported by tighter US inventories and I guess a much more robust demand outlook. Of course, the only laggard there, as I said, was gasoline. Let's move quickly now to Nigerian equities. Let's look at markets during the week. Nigerian equities there. The all-share index was up week on week. It was a positive week, actually. Even market capitalization did climb. Liquidity indicators did obviously drop sharply. Let's look at what happened here. The ASI gained 2.45%, equity cap rising, a similar margin, renewed interest in large caps we saw during the week like MTN Nigeria, Zenith Bank. Deals were also up nearly 2%, but I think the headline story is liquidity. Market volume of shares traded plunged by 80% and value traded fell almost 26%. Probably fewer bigger ticket transactions despite the market's upward move. So it was a green week on the board, but participation was much thinner. If you look at the reds there, volume and value. Now let's take a look at African markets. Mixed this week. South Africa led the gains while West and East Africa softened. The JSE climbed 1.37%. Mining stocks and banking stocks were the big story there. And Ghana's stock exchange in Accra was a bit negative, some cooler sentiment there after recent gains we saw the previous week. In Nairobi, the index slipped 0.82%, mostly pressure from financials, while Morocco's Massi also fell by 0.72%. Most investors there taking profits in key industrial names. It was a broadly neutral week, but with the JSE actually standing out as the region's strongest performer. Let's look at Europe. European equities advanced this week, mostly strong rebound in Spain. There you'll see the IBEX 38 in Spain had a 2.04% increase week on week. The Euro Stock 600 index rose 0.56%. Germany's DAX was up nearly 1% on stronger industrial sentiment. France's CSE was mostly flat, but still positive. And of course, as I said earlier, IBEX in Spain was the big standout. Now let's get over to the wall. My favorite part of the markets, my top picks from around the world. Now, the big news, which you would have seen come out on the wires last night, was this news that Netflix, global streaming giant with over 300 million subscribers, has agreed an $83 billion takeover of Warner Bros. Discovery. Now, if you look at the name Warner Bros. Discovery, itself is a merger and acquisition between Discovery and Warner Bros. So that merger, which was consummated some years ago, is now being acquired by Netflix. And get this, the market cap during the week of Warner Bros. Was about $60 billion. The offer that Netflix has made for Warner Bros. Is bigger than the entire market cap of Warner Bros. Now, I guess you're thinking what I'm thinking, right? Is this going to become a competition, a monopoly issue? We'll see. We haven't heard much out of the American market, but we know that EU regulators are likely to look at this closely. I don't personally think they will stop this transaction from going ahead, but they might impose conditions. And if you think about it, Warner Bros. Has HBO, and it also has some franchises, Wonder Woman, I think Superman is in there as well, and the Harry Potter franchise. So this acquisition by Netflix is probably going to be the biggest story of 2026, which is when the deal is likely to be consummated. Both the boards of both companies have actually approved this planned acquisition. And I guess the shareholders in Warner Brothers, investors, are going to be laughing all the way to the bank if this mega deal, which I would term the mega deal of the decade actually, is finally approved. I'll be keeping a very close eye on that one. I think it's really big news this week. The next story here, of course, during the week, on the 1st of December, Nigeria's Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, NUPRC, launched its new oil and gas licensing round. And it's targeting about $10 billion worth of investments here. 50 blocks are up for auction, 15 onshore assets here, 19 shallow water, 15 frontier, and 1 deep water asset. And the licensing round and the assets that come online post development are expected to add an additional 2 million barrels output over the next 10 years, around 400,000 barrels a day in the first couple of years. And one of the key differentiating factors of this round is just the huge move towards utilizing technology and digitization to help make this licensing round more efficient. And the NUPRC said it reprocessed thousands of kilometers of 2D and 3D seismic data. And very interesting here, because last year we had a licensing round. Many of those blocks are currently being developed or explored, as the case may be. And of course, we know that financing capacity and technical capacity will be big considerations. Of course, as well as the huge signature bonuses that the government typically reaps out of this type of activity. So all the best to all the bidders and auctioneers, and very good luck to the Nigerian oil and gas sector as a whole. Africa has hit a record $1 trillion in new assets under management. And simply what that means is sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, right? Assets under management, financial assets that can be deployed towards long-term development. And that's according to a global SWF tracker, sovereign fund tracker. In Africa, in 2025 alone, 5 new sovereign wealth funds were launched. Botswana, the DRC, Eswatini, Kenya, and Nigeria's Oyo State also launched its own sub-sovereign wealth fund. The Libyan Investment Authority remains the largest sovereign wealth fund on the African continent at about $68 billion. Now, the big question is, with all this money in assets, how do we mobilize and deploy this capital into infrastructure projects, into alternative asset classes for long-term sustainable investment? And it's a key question and problem we've been trying to solve for many years. So the very fact of having an increase in the pool of capital sovereigns are managing across the African continent is very different from the ability to deploy this effectively into productive uses across the economy. Let's take a look now at my next story. The UK Export Finance Agency, that's the Export Credit Agency of the UK, has pulled a $1 billion commitment to the Mozambique LNG project. Now, if you recall, Total is one of the big sponsors of that project. A couple of years ago, Total had to suspend that project due to militant activity in Mozambique. In fact, at one point, the project declared force majeure and was on hold. Now, this is a big one, right? This is a $1 billion commitment for gas infrastructure in Africa, notwithstanding that you have about 6 or 7 export credit agencies that are helping to finance and bankroll this project. In fact, the US Exim Bank has committed $4.5 billion to the project. So there's still other Western partners who are going to help finance that. But this $1 billion pullback does raise questions, first of all, about the UK government's commitment to infrastructure in the energy sector. The Africa Energy Chamber has written on the back of this saying this is such a negative move for support to the continent. But if you recall, Chancellor Reeves in the UK last week released a government budget focus on domestic priorities. We might see a retrenchment of capital from the UK market into these types of projects on the African continent. So it's not altogether surprising, but to pull back $1 billion of committed financing is a major move. And it'll be interesting to see how this pans out for that project, of course, and the shareholders of Mozambique LNG. Kenya is selling 15% in Safaricom to Vodacom for $1.6 billion. Safaricom now the biggest telecoms provider, capturing about 60% of market share in the Kenyan market, and especially through the mobile payments platform M-Pesa. Vodacom is also, as part of this deal, buying rights to future dividends on the state's remaining shares. As you know, Kenya has been pursuing asset sales across board, with the government facing many fiscal headwinds and looking for ways to raise financing for states and also boost its ability to engage productively and effectively with its international partners, the IMF, the World Bank, and so on. Hope you enjoyed my top picks for the week. That's it from me for now. Let's move to the market reads. Let's now take you to some of our other top stories from around the world. Silver, precious metal, nicknamed the devil's metal for its volatility, has hit record highs this year and still has further to run despite a supply crunch. That's according to experts. Silver prices peaked at $57 per troy ounce in late November. That's a 90% year-on-year surge, mirroring gold's rally past $4,000 an ounce. Prices have since pulled back but are climbing again despite tight supply. And it's interesting because we often talk about gold hitting record highs. Now silver is following suit. Eurozone inflation unexpectedly ticked up last month, likely ending hopes for further ECB, that's the European Central Bank, rate cuts anytime soon. Inflation in the 20 euro nations accelerated to 2.2% from 2.1%, hovering near the ECB's 2% target as falling energy prices were offset by persistent pressure in services. Switzerland voted to reject a 50% inheritance tax on the super rich residents of the country after wealthy entrepreneurs threatened to leave the country. The plan was opposed by 78.3% of voters, with 43% turnout. The measure didn't achieve a majority in a single canton. Australia will introduce one of the world's toughest social media policies for children next week. December 10, I believe, is the start of that ban. And Meta has already started locking under 16s out of Instagram and Facebook with age checks. Other platforms, including TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube, Reddit, Twitch, Kick, Threads, and X, are contacting underage users to download their data before accounts are frozen or deleted until they turn 16.
In 1 week, Australia will become the first country in the world to ban under 16s from having social media accounts. With one law, we can protect Generation Alpha from being sucked into purgatory by predatory algorithms described by the man who created the feature as behavioural cocaine. If a child has a social media account on 10 December, then that platform is breaking the law.
It's quite a major move from the Australian government there. It will be interesting to see whether other countries follow suit. Now, in other news, India's central bank cut its policy rate by 25 basis points to 5.25% on Friday, matching economist forecasts. The unanimous decision cited weakness in some key economic indicators, even as inflation has eased significantly and is expected to be revised lower in Q1 2025. That's according to the Reserve Bank of India Governor Sanjay Malhotra. Now, here in Africa, Ghana's inflation rate declined for the 11th straight month to the lowest level in almost 7 years, boosting expectations the central bank will continue cutting interest rates in 2026. Annual inflation decelerated to 6.3% in November, the lowest since February 2019, from 8% the previous month. Government statistician Al Hassan Idrisu said food disinflation was the key driver. Now, South Africa said on Thursday it would wait out next year's G20 after being barred by the US. Secretary of State Marco Rubio repeated Wednesday that South Africa would not be invited to the US-run G20, citing various complaints. Presidential spokesman Vincent Magwenya said South Africa would sit out 2026 and resume participation when Britain takes over in 2027. The Central Bank of Nigeria's newly revised cash deposit and withdrawal limits have triggered mixed reactions across the financial ecosystem. The CBN circular released Tuesday raises weekly cash withdrawal limits to 500,000 naira for individuals and 5 million naira for corporate entities effective January 1, 2026, a departure from the stringent 2022 restrictions, but reopening debates about financial inclusion and Nigeria's digital payment shift. Nigeria has approved payment of $128 million, that's about 185 billion naira, in long-standing debts owed to gas producers, aiming to restore confidence and improve electricity supply. The National Economic Council approved the decision following President Tinubu's directive to clear arrears that have discouraged investment, strained cash flows, and curtailed gas supply for power generation.